The wind cut through the Texas plains like 1,000 frozen knives, and Graham Morrison knew he was in serious trouble as the first flakes of snow began to fall with an intensity that promised death to anyone caught unprepared. It was December 1878, and Graham had been riding for 3 days straight from San Antonio to deliver urgent documents to a ranch owner near the New Mexico border. The sky had been clear that morning, deceptively calm, but now as afternoon faded into early evening, the temperature plummeted and the wind howled with a fury he had rarely witnessed in his 26 years. He pulled his coat tighter around his lean frame and urged his horse forward, knowing he needed shelter fast. The landscape around him was mostly flat with scattered clusters of rocks and the occasional twisted mesquite tree, offering little protection from what was rapidly becoming a full blizzard. His horse whinnied nervously, steam rising from its nostrils as the snow began to accumulate on the ground with alarming speed. Graham squinted through the white curtain, desperately searching for any kind of refuge. His fingers were already going numb despite his leather gloves, and he knew hypothermia would set in quickly once the sun fully disappeared. Then he saw it, a dark shape ahead that looked like an outcropping of rocks forming a shallow cave. It was not much, but it might be enough to keep them alive through the night. As he drew closer, he noticed something else, a figure huddled near the entrance, partially buried in snow. His heart jumped. Someone else was out here in this deadly weather. Graham dismounted quickly, his boots crunching in the rapidly deepening snow. The figure was small, wrapped in what looked like buckskin and woven blankets that were inadequate for this kind of cold. He approached cautiously, calling out over the wind, but received no response. When he knelt down beside the person, he realized it was a young woman, her lips tinged blue, her body shivering violently. Her features and clothing marked her as Apache, and she appeared to be barely conscious. Without hesitation, Graham scooped her into his arms. She was light, too light, and he could feel how cold she was even through her layers of clothing. He carried her deeper into the rocky shelter, which opened up into a space just large enough for the three of them. After settling her against the back wall where it was driest, he quickly went back for his horse, leading the animal into the entrance of the cave to block some of the wind. The temperature inside was marginally better, but still dangerously cold. Graham worked fast, pulling supplies from his saddlebags. He had matches, a small amount of dried wood he had been carrying, and most importantly, extra blankets. He managed to get a small fire started using some of the wood and dried brush he found at the back of the cave, likely left by previous travelers who had sheltered here. Once the fire was crackling, he turned his attention back to the woman. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow. He knew the signs of severe exposure and understood that she needed warmth immediately, or she would not survive the night. Graham removed his heavy coat and wrapped it around her, then layered his spare blankets on top. He rubbed her hands between his own, trying to restore circulation, all the while talking to her even though she seemed unconscious. "Come on now, stay with me. You are going to be all right. I have got you. You are safe." The fire grew stronger, its heat slowly filling the small space. Graham kept working on the woman, removing her wet moccasins and wrapping her feet in dry cloth from his pack. Her fingers were dangerously cold, and he worried about frostbite as he continued to massage warmth back into them. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, her eyelids fluttered. Graham felt a surge of relief. "That is it. Open your eyes. You are safe now." Her eyes opened slowly, dark and disoriented. She stared at him for a long moment, confusion and fear mixing in her gaze. She tried to speak, but her teeth were chattering too violently. "Do not try to talk yet," Graham said gently. Just focus on getting warm. I have water here, warm water." He had heated his canteen near the fire, and now he carefully brought it to her lips. She drank slowly at first, then more eagerly. As color gradually returned to her face, she studied him with those intelligent dark eyes. Graham could see she was young, probably around 20 or so, with delicate features and long black hair that had come partially loose from its braiding. Finally, she spoke, her voice raspy but clear. "You saved my life." Her English was good, only slightly accented. Graham nodded. "I could not leave you out there. What happened? How did you end up alone in this storm?" She pulled the blankets tighter around herself, and he saw a flash of pain cross her face. "I was traveling with my cousin to meet relatives in another territory. We were separated when the storm hit suddenly. I tried to find shelter, but I was already too cold. I thought I would die here." "Well, you did not," Graham said firmly. "The name is Graham Morrison. Most people call me Gray." She looked at him for a long moment, seeming to weigh something in her mind. "I am called Juliana Everett." Graham's surprise must have shown on his face because she offered a small, tired smile. "My mother was Apache. My father was a trader from the East. He gave me his name and taught me English before he died 5 years ago. I have lived with my mother's people since then." "I am sorry about your father," Graham said sincerely. He added more of his precious wood to the fire. "We are going to have to wait out this storm. It is too dangerous to travel, and your horse—" "Gone," she said quietly. "She bolted when the wind became too strong. I could not hold on." "Then we ride together once this passes. My horse can carry us both until we reach the nearest town." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind howl outside their shelter. The temperature continued to drop, and even with the fire, Graham could feel the cold seeping in. He moved closer to Juliana, not inappropriately close, but near enough that they could share body heat. She did not protest. "You are a cowboy?" she asked after a time, her voice stronger now. "Of sorts. I do ranch work, some herding, occasional deliveries like the one I am on now. Whatever pays honest money." He studied her in the firelight. "Your people, will they be looking for you? My cousin will try, but not in this storm. He will think I found shelter or—" She trailed off, not wanting to say the alternative. "You did find shelter," Graham assured her. "And you are going to be fine." As the night deepened, the storm showed no signs of abating. Snow piled up at the cave entrance, and Graham had to periodically clear it away to ensure they had ventilation for the fire. His horse stood patiently, occasionally stamping its feet but otherwise calm. Graham shared his dried beef and hardtack with Juliana, and she ate gratefully, though the food was plain and tough. They talked to pass the time and keep their spirits up. Graham learned that Juliana's mother had met her father when he had come through Apache territory trading goods. It had been an unusual match, one that both their peoples had viewed with suspicion, but they had loved each other deeply. Her father had tried to bring them to live in a settlement, but her mother could never fully adapt to that life. When he died from fever, they returned to her mother's people permanently. "My mother passed 2 winters ago," Juliana said softly. "Since then, I have tried to find my place. I am Apache, but I am also not fully Apache. Some accept me, others see me as mixed blood and therefore lesser." Graham heard the pain in her voice. "That must be difficult, not fully belonging anywhere." "You understand," she said, looking at him with surprise. "In my own way. My parents died when I was 14, cholera outbreak. I have been on my own since then, drifting from job to job, town to town. No real home, no family. I belong to the land and the work, but there is a loneliness in that." Their eyes met across the fire, and something passed between them, a recognition of shared isolation and survival against difficult odds. The night grew colder still. Graham fed the last of his wood to the fire and knew they would have to let it die soon. The alternative was to burn his saddle or other essential gear, which could doom them tomorrow. He made the difficult decision to conserve what they had. "We are going to have to stay very close to keep warm," he said, trying to keep his voice matter-of-fact. "The fire will not last much longer." Juliana nodded, understanding the necessity. When the flames finally flickered down to embers, Graham arranged their blankets into a kind of cocoon. They lay down together, fully clothed with every available layer piled on top of them. His horse provided a windbreak, and the cave walls sheltered them from the worst of it, but the cold was still brutal. Graham could feel Juliana trembling against him. He wrapped his arms around her, purely for warmth and survival, and felt her gradually relax into his embrace. "Talk to me," he said. "Tell me anything. We need to stay awake and alert." So she told him about her childhood, about learning to track and hunt from her mother's people, about her father teaching her to read using a worn Bible and whatever newspapers he could acquire. She had loved both worlds, the freedom of Apache life and the knowledge contained in her father's books. She spoke of beautiful sunrises over the desert, of ceremonies under stars, of the pain of never quite fitting in either world. Graham listened, genuinely fascinated. He shared his own stories in turn, about learning to ride almost before he could walk, about working cattle drives and sleeping under endless skies, about the rough towns and rougher men he had encountered. He told her about his dreams of one day having his own small ranch, nothing grand, just enough land to raise good horses and live peacefully. "That sounds wonderful," Juliana murmured. Her voice was getting drowsy. "Stay awake," Graham urged, though he was fighting exhaustion himself. "Tell me more. Tell me about Apache traditions." She roused herself and continued talking, explaining about coming-of-age ceremonies, about the importance of family and tribal bonds, about the tension between her people, and the increasing encroachment of settlers and soldiers. Her voice held both love for her heritage and sadness for its uncertain future. Somewhere in the darkest hours of the night, despite their best efforts, they both dozed. Graham woke periodically, checking that they were both still breathing, that the cave entrance had not become completely blocked with snow. Each time he woke, he held Juliana a little closer, feeling a growing protectiveness toward this woman he had only just met. When dawn finally came, it was visible only as a gradual lightening of the darkness. The storm had not stopped, but it had lessened somewhat. Graham carefully extracted himself from their blanket cocoon and checked outside. Snow had drifted several feet high in places, and the wind still blew fiercely, but he could see perhaps 50 feet now instead of only a few feet. Juliana stirred, sitting up slowly. Her hair was disheveled, her face creased from sleep, but her color was good and her eyes were clear. "We survived," she said, and there was wonder in her voice. "We did," Graham agreed. He felt something shift in his chest as he looked at her, this brave woman who had nearly died but was now sitting up with determination written across her features. "Are you hungry?" They shared the last of his meager supplies for breakfast. Graham knew they needed to leave as soon as possible, even though the storm continued. Their food was gone, they had no more wood for fire, and staying in the cave would eventually mean freezing or starving. "Can you ride?" He asked Juliana. She stood, testing her legs. They trembled slightly, but she nodded. "I can ride." Graham saddled his horse, using the blankets to provide extra padding since Juliana would be riding behind him. Before they left, he turned to her. "The nearest town I know of is about 15 miles southeast. In this weather, it will take us most of the day to reach it, maybe longer. It will be hard. Are you ready?" Juliana met his gaze steadily. "I am ready. You saved my life, Graham Morrison. I will not waste it by giving up now." He helped her onto the horse, then mounted in front of her. She wrapped her arms around his waist, holding tight, and he could feel the trust in that grip. They emerged from their shelter into a white wilderness. The world had been transformed by snow, landmarks buried, the familiar made strange and dangerous. Graham guided his horse carefully, relying on his instincts and years of experience navigating difficult terrain. The wind battered them constantly, and the cold was penetrating despite their layers. He felt Juliana press closer against his back, seeking what warmth and shelter his body could provide. They traveled in silence, all their energy focused on surviving the journey. Graham's horse was strong and steady, but even this reliable mount struggled through the deep snow. They had to stop frequently to let the animal rest, and during these stops, Graham and Juliana would stamp their feet and move their arms to keep circulation going. Around what he guessed was midday, though the sun was invisible behind the heavy clouds, they came across a frozen creek. Graham recognized it and felt a surge of hope. He knew this creek. If they followed it south, it would lead them toward settlements. They were not as lost as he had feared. "We are on the right track," he called back to Juliana over the wind. He felt her arms tighten around him in response. Another hour passed, then two. Graham's face was numb, his hands aching despite his gloves. He worried constantly about Juliana behind him, unable to see her face or judge her condition. "Are you all right?" He called back periodically, and each time she responded that she was, though her voice grew weaker as the day wore on. Just when Graham was beginning to fear they had miscalculated and would not make it before dark, he saw smoke rising in the distance. Civilization. A town, or at least a ranch. He urged his tired horse forward with renewed energy. The smoke came from the chimneys of a small settlement, barely worthy of the name town. It was perhaps a dozen buildings clustered together, but to Graham it looked like paradise. They rode down what he assumed was the main street, past a shuttered general store and a small church, heading toward the largest building which bore a sign declaring it to be the Lucky Star Inn. Graham dismounted stiffly, his legs nearly buckling after so many hours in the saddle. He reached up to help Juliana down and was alarmed to see how pale she was, her lips once again taking on that dangerous blue tinge. Without a word, he swept her into his arms and carried her toward the inn's entrance, kicking the door open with his boot. Warmth enveloped them immediately. A fire roared in a large stone fireplace, and the smell of cooking food made Graham's stomach clench with hunger. A heavy-set woman with gray hair bustled forward, her face creased with concern. "Good Lord, get them by the fire," she commanded, her voice brooking no argument. "Tom, take care of that horse out front. You there, Cowboy, bring the girl closer to the warmth." Graham obeyed, carrying Juliana to a chair near the fireplace. The woman, who introduced herself as Martha Green, the innkeeper, immediately took charge. She brought heated blankets, hot soup, and coffee laced with whiskey. Her husband Tom came in after stabling Graham's horse and helped Graham out of his frozen outer layers. "You two are lucky to be alive," Martha declared. "This storm came out of nowhere. We have got 4 other people trapped here waiting it out." "Where did you come from?" Graham explained briefly about finding Juliana and sheltering in the cave. Martha's eyes softened as she looked at the young woman. "Apache, are you, dear?" Juliana, who had been silent since they arrived, simply warming her hands around a mug of soup, nodded. Graham saw the wariness in her eyes, the expectation of prejudice, but Martha just smiled kindly. "Well, you are safe here. Any person who needs shelter is welcome in my home. I do not care about anything else. Now drink that soup before it gets cold." Graham felt Juliana relax slightly. Over the next hour, as warmth and food restored them both, Martha fussed over them like a mother hen. She insisted they both needed proper rest and showed them to separate small rooms upstairs. "You can settle up payment once the storm clears and you are back on your feet," she said when Graham tried to discuss money. "For now, just rest." Graham wanted to protest, but exhaustion was overwhelming him. He looked toward Juliana, who was being guided toward another room by Martha. Their eyes met across the hallway. "Thank you," Juliana said softly, "for everything." "We are not done yet," Graham replied, though he was not entirely sure what he meant by that. "Rest now." He collapsed onto the narrow bed in his room and was asleep within seconds, his last thought being of dark eyes and a brave smile. When Graham woke, it was fully dark outside and the storm still raged. He rose, washed his face in the basin of cold water provided, and made his way downstairs. The common room of the inn had several people gathered around the fire. Martha was serving supper, a hearty stew with fresh bread, and the smell made Graham's mouth water. He spotted Juliana sitting at a table in the corner, and his heart did an odd little jump at the sight of her. She had cleaned up and changed into different clothes, a simple dress that Martha must have loaned her. Her long hair was braided neatly down her back, and she looked both more fragile and more beautiful than she had in her traveling buckskins. Graham got himself a bowl of stew and joined her without asking permission. She looked up and smiled, a real smile that lit up her entire face. "You slept long. I thought maybe you would sleep straight through to spring." "I thought about it," Graham admitted. He dug into his food and they ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Then he asked, "How are you feeling?" "Better. Warm, fed, alive." She said the last word with emphasis. "Because of you." Graham felt uncomfortable with her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. "No," Juliana said firmly. "Not everyone. Many would have left an Apache woman to die in the snow. Some would have considered it a favor to their people." Graham wanted to deny it but could not. He had seen too much prejudice in his travels, too much casual cruelty. Instead, he just said, "Well, I am not most people. I know." Her gaze was steady on his. "I have been thinking all afternoon while you slept about what I owe you." "You do not owe me anything," Graham protested. "I owe you my life. That is not a small debt among my mother's people." She took a breath and Graham saw that she was nervous, her hands clasped tightly together. "There is a tradition, an old way. When someone saves your life, especially in circumstances like these, especially when they shelter you and protect you with such care, you offer them something of value in return." Graham started to speak, to tell her again that no repayment was necessary, but she held up a hand. "Please let me finish. I have nothing of material value to give you. No horses, no gold, no land, but I can offer myself. My loyalty, my skills, my companionship." She paused, then said very clearly, "Graham Morrison, I will be your wife if you will have me." The common room seemed to fade away. Graham stared at Juliana, certain he had misheard or misunderstood. "What?" "I know it sounds strange," she said quickly, her words tumbling out now. "We barely know each other, but I am a good worker. I can hunt and track and cook, and so I would not be a burden. And I have nowhere else to go, no family waiting for me. You spoke of wanting a ranch someday, a peaceful life. I could help you build that. I would be a good wife to you." Graham's mind was reeling. "Juliana, you do not have to do this. You do not owe me a life debt." "This is not just about debt," she said, and her voice dropped lower, more intimate. "Last night in the cave when we talked and shared warmth and stories, I felt something, a connection. Did you not feel it too?" Graham could not lie. "Yes, I felt it." "Then why not this? We are both alone in the world. We both understand hardship and survival. We fit together well." She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "You do not have to answer right now. Think about it, but know that my offer is sincere." Graham looked down at her small, calloused hand covering his larger one. His heart was pounding. This was insane. You did not marry a woman you had just met, regardless of the circumstances. And yet, as he looked into her eyes, he felt the truth of what she said. There was a connection between them, forged in life and death circumstances, strengthened by shared vulnerability. "People will talk," he said finally. "A white cowboy and an Apache woman. Let them talk. We will be too busy surviving and building a life to care. I have very little money. That ranch I talked about is just a dream right now. Dreams can become real if two people work toward them together." Graham felt something crack open inside him, a lonely place he had not even fully acknowledged existed. The idea of not being alone anymore, of having a partner, someone who understood him, it was powerfully appealing. But was it fair to her? "Why me?" he asked. "Really, truly, why would you tie yourself to a drifting cowboy with no prospects?" Juliana's eyes were bright. "Because you are kind. Because when you found me dying, you did not hesitate to save me even though I was a stranger. Even though I am Apache and there are many who would have seen my death as no loss. Because you held me through the coldest night and made me feel safe. Because when you talked about your dreams, I could see the goodness in your heart." She squeezed his hand. "And because I do not want to be alone anymore either." The simple honesty of that last statement reached Graham deeply. He turned his hand over, clasping hers properly. "If we do this, it would be a real marriage. I would not treat you as a debt payment or a servant. You would be my true wife, my partner." "That is all I would want," Juliana said. Graham took a deep breath. This was either the smartest or most foolish decision of his life, but his instincts, honed by years of surviving on the frontier, told him this was right. "Then I accept." Joy blazed across Juliana's face. "Truly, truly." Graham found himself smiling, a real deep smile that he had not felt in years. "I accept your offer, Juliana Everett. I will be your husband if you will be my wife." She laughed, a beautiful sound that turned heads in the common room. "Yes, I will. I already said I would." They sat there grinning at each other like fools until Martha appeared at their table. "I do not mean to interrupt young folks, but I could not help overhearing some of that. Are you two getting married?" Graham looked at Juliana, saw her nod, and said, "Yes, madam, we are." Martha beamed. "Well, that is wonderful news. When?" "As soon as possible," Juliana said firmly. "As soon as there is someone who can perform the ceremony." "The circuit preacher is actually stranded here," Martha said excitedly. "Reverend Collins, he is one of the others waiting out the storm. I am sure he would marry you once the weather clears enough to use the church." And so it was decided. Over the next 3 days, while the storm gradually blew itself out, Graham and Juliana prepared for their wedding. It gave them time to really talk, to learn about each other beyond those desperate hours in the cave. Graham learned that Juliana could read and write in both English and Spanish, that she had a quick wit and a talent for storytelling, that she was fiercely independent but also deeply loyal. Juliana learned that Graham had a surprising gentleness with animals, that he had taught himself to read using a battered dictionary and whatever books he could borrow or trade for, that, beneath his quiet exterior, lay a thoughtful, principled man who had survived through determination and integrity. They talked about practical matters too. Graham had a job waiting for him at a ranch near El Paso, basic cowhand work that would at least provide steady pay and a place to stay through the winter. It was not much, but it was a start. Juliana assured him she could find work too, cooking or cleaning or whatever was needed. "We will save every penny we can," Graham said as they walked through the town on the fourth day, when the sun finally emerged and began the long work of melting the snow. "In a few years, maybe we could have enough for a down payment on some land." "I know where there is good land," Juliana said thoughtfully. "Near the Pecos River, there is a valley that my people used to visit. Good water, good grass, sheltered from the worst winds. Some settlers have moved near there, but there is still unclaimed territory." Graham liked how she said "we" and "our" when talking about the future, as if they had already been together for years rather than days. It felt natural, right? The other people stranded at the inn had mixed reactions to the upcoming wedding. The circuit preacher, Reverend Collins, was an elderly man with kind eyes who seemed genuinely pleased to perform the ceremony. A couple traveling from Kansas to visit relatives in Santa Fe thought it was romantic. But a merchant heading to El Paso made his disapproval clear with cold looks and muttered comments about mixing with savages. Graham confronted him on the morning of the wedding. "If you have something to say it to my face." The merchant, a portly man named Williams, sneered. "I just think it is a shame to see a white man lower himself. There are proper Christian women who need husbands." Graham felt anger flash through him, but he kept his voice level. "Juliana is the finest woman I have ever met. She is braver, kinder, and smarter than most people I have encountered, yourself included. If you cannot speak respectfully about my wife, then keep silent." Williams sputtered but said nothing more. When Graham recounted the confrontation to Juliana, she touched his face gently. "You will face judgment for this choice. We both will." "Are you sure you are ready for that?" "I have never been more sure of anything," Graham said honestly. "Let people talk. We know the truth." The wedding took place in the small church on a bright, cold morning. Snow still covered everything, making the world look fresh and new. Martha had helped Juliana alter one of her own dresses into something suitable for a wedding, a simple blue wool dress that brought out the warm tones of Juliana's skin. She wore her hair loose, flowing down her back, and Graham thought she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He wore his best clothes, cleaned and pressed by Martha, and stood nervously at the altar as Juliana walked down the short aisle. There were only a handful of people present: Martha and Tom, the Kansas couple, and a few locals from town who had heard about the wedding and came out of curiosity. Reverend Collins performed a simple ceremony. When he asked Graham if he would take Juliana as his wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, in sickness and health, Graham said, "I do," with absolute conviction. When Juliana said the same words, her voice was clear and strong, her eyes never leaving his. They had no rings, but Martha had loaned them a simple gold band that had belonged to her mother. Graham slipped it onto Juliana's finger, promising silently to buy her a proper ring of her own someday. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Collins said with a smile. "You may kiss your bride." Graham had been nervous about this moment. They had not kissed yet, had barely touched beyond necessary warmth and comfort during their ordeal. But as he leaned down and Juliana rose up to meet him, the kiss felt like the most natural thing in the world. Her lips were soft and warm, and the kiss was gentle but full of promise. The small congregation applauded, and Martha wiped tears from her eyes. "Beautiful, just beautiful," she declared. There was a small celebration back at the inn, with a cake Martha had somehow managed to bake and hot coffee all around. Graham and Juliana sat close together, her hand in his, accepting congratulations from the well-wishers and ignoring the merchant Williams who left without a word. That evening, Martha gave them the best room in the inn for their wedding night. Graham felt nervous as he climbed the stairs with Juliana. They were legally married now, but everything had happened so fast. What if she regretted her choice? What if he disappointed her? Juliana seemed to sense his nervousness. Once they were alone in the room, she took both his hands in hers. "Are you sorry you married me?" "No," Graham said immediately. "Never. Are you sorry?" "Not for one moment." She smiled up at him. "But we do not have to rush anything. We have the rest of our lives." Graham felt relief wash over him, followed by a surge of affection for this woman who understood him so well already. "Come here," he said softly, and pulled her into an embrace. They held each other for a long time, just breathing together, getting used to this new intimacy. Eventually they lay down on the bed together, still fully clothed, and talked quietly until sleep overtook them. It was not the passionate wedding night that stories were made of, but it felt right for them, this gentle beginning to their marriage. The next morning they settled their bill with Martha, Graham promising to repay her kindness someday when he was able. The innkeeper hugged them both fiercely. "You two take care of each other. Marriage is not always easy, but I can see you have got something special. Hold on to it." They rode out together on Graham's horse, heading south toward El Paso and the job that waited there. The sun was bright on the melting snow, and the air, while still cold, had lost its killing edge. Juliana sat behind Graham, her arms around his waist, and he could feel her contentment like a warm glow against his back. The journey took them for days, camping at night and traveling by day. They talked constantly, learning more about each other with each passing mile. At night, they shared a bedroll for warmth, and Graham felt their physical comfort with each other growing naturally. There were shy kisses and gentle touches, but also laughter and easy companionship. On the third night, as they lay under the stars, Juliana said, "Tell me more about this ranch you dream of. What would it look like?" Graham, his arm around her as she nestled against his shoulder, thought about it. "Nothing too big, maybe 100 acres of good grazing land. A small house, just enough for a family. A sturdy barn for the horses because I would want to raise horses more than cattle. Horses are smarter, more individual. I like working with them." "What kind of house?" Juliana asked. "One with a big fireplace for winter. A wide porch for sitting on summer evenings. A kitchen with a proper stove." He paused. "A bedroom with a real bed, not just a narrow cot. Maybe a second bedroom for when we have children." He felt Juliana stiffen slightly at that last part. "You want children?" "Someday, if we are blessed with them." "Do you?" There was a long pause. Then Juliana said quietly, "I have always wanted children, but I worried that I would never find a husband who would accept me, that I would never have a family of my own. Now that seems possible, and it frightens me a little." "What if I am not a good mother?" Graham turned so he could see her face in the starlight. "You will be a wonderful mother. You are brave and strong and kind. Those are the most important things. What if our children face hatred for being mixed blood? Then we will teach them to be proud of who they are, to know that they come from two strong peoples, that they carry the best of both." Graham touched her face gently. "Any child of yours would be lucky, Juliana, and I would love them completely, without reservation." She kissed him then, deeper than before, with a passion that made his blood heat. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, she whispered, "I am glad I married you, Graham Morrison." "I am glad you asked me," he replied, making her laugh. They arrived in El Paso on a bright January afternoon. The town was bustling and rough, full of cowboys, soldiers, miners, and traders. It sat on the Rio Grande, right at the border with Mexico, and the mix of cultures was evident in the architecture and the languages spoken on the streets. Graham reported to the ranch where he had been promised work, a spread about 10 miles outside of town owned by a man named Samuel Carter. Carter was a gruff, weathered rancher in his 50s who looked Graham up and down critically. "You are Morrison. You are late." Yes, sir, I got caught in that blizzard up north, nearly died, but I am here now and ready to work. Carter's eyes shifted to Juliana, who had insisted on accompanying Graham to meet his new employer. Who is this? This is my wife, Juliana. Carter's eyebrows shot up. Your wife. You did not mention a wife in your letter. I did not have one when I wrote the letter, Graham admitted. We were married a week ago. Carter looked between them, clearly noting Juliana's Apache heritage. For a moment, Graham thought he would be dismissed on the spot. Then Carter shrugged. None of my business who you marry. But the job I offered was for a single man sharing the bunkhouse. I cannot have a woman in there with 10 other ranch hands. Graham's heart sank. I understand. I will look for other work then. Hold on, I did not say I would not hire you. You came recommended as a good worker with horses, and I need that. Carter thought for a moment. There is an old line shack about 2 miles from the main house. It is not much, just 2 rooms, but it has got a roof that does not leak and a working stove. You and your wife can live there. Pay will be $30 a month plus beef and basic supplies. That fair? Relief flooded through Graham. It was not generous pay, but it was fair for a cowhand with accommodation. That is more than fair, Mr. Carter. Thank you. Do not thank me yet. The work is hard and the hours are long. I expect full days from you, 6 days a week. Sundays you can have off unless there is an emergency. Can she cook? He nodded toward Juliana. I can cook, Juliana said, speaking for the first time. I can also ride, track, and handle livestock. If you need extra hands during busy times, I can help. Carter looked surprised but nodded approvingly. I might take you up on that. All right then, let me show you to the line shack. You can get settled today and Morrison can start work tomorrow. The line shack was exactly as Carter had described, small and rough but weatherproof. It had a main room with a stove, table, and 2 chairs, and a separate bedroom with a bed frame that needed a mattress. There were gaps in the walls that would need chinking, and the whole place needed a good cleaning, but to Graham and Juliana it looked like a palace. It is ours, Juliana said wonderingly, running her hand over the dusty table. Our first real home together. Graham came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. It is not much. It is everything, she said, turning in his embrace. It is a start. They spent the rest of the day making the place habitable. Graham rode into town and bought a straw tick mattress with some of his remaining money, plus basic supplies like flour, beans, coffee, and salt. Juliana cleaned every surface, swept out the accumulated dust and debris, and began the work of chinking the wall gaps with mud and grass. That night, they cooked their first meal together in their own home, a simple supper of beans and cornbread. They ate by lamplight at their small table, and Graham thought he had never tasted anything better. After supper, they prepared for bed properly for the first time as a married couple. There was awkwardness and nervousness, but also growing desire. When Graham finally pulled Juliana into his arms in their marriage bed, really kissed her, really held her, she responded with a passion that matched his own. "Are you sure?" he asked, even as his hands trembled with the need to touch her. "I am your wife," she said simply, "and you are my husband. I want this, Graham, I want you." Their joining was tender and awkward and beautiful, 2 people learning each other, giving themselves to each other. Afterward, lying tangled together in the narrow bed, Juliana traced patterns on Graham's chest with her fingers. "No regrets?" he asked softly. "None." She looked up at him, her dark eyes luminous in the dim light. "I love you, Graham Morrison. I know it is fast and may be foolish, but I do." Graham felt his heart expand in his chest. "I love you too, Juliana. I think I started loving you in that cave when you refused to give up, when you kept talking and fighting to survive. You are the strongest person I have ever met." She kissed him then, and their passion reignited. They made love again, slower this time, learning what pleased each other, building the physical intimacy that would sustain them through the years ahead. The next morning, Graham started work at the Carter Ranch. The days were long and physically demanding, but he was used to hard work. He mostly dealt with the horses, breaking new mounts, training working horses, and caring for the breeding stock. It was work he enjoyed, and he was good at it. The other ranch hands were a mixed group. Some accepted him neutrally, others were openly curious about his Apache wife. One hand, a young hothead named Billy Parker, made a crude comment about Juliana within Graham's hearing. Graham dropped the saddle he was carrying and turned slowly to face Billy. "What did you just say?" Billy, backed up by a couple of friends, repeated his comment, even cruder this time. Graham did not hesitate. He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides and laid Billy out with a single punch. The ranch yard went silent. Billy's friends helped him up, and he came at Graham with fury. They fought hard, rolling in the dirt, trading blows. Graham took some hits but gave back worse. By the time Samuel Carter came running from the house, shouting for them to stop, Billy was on the ground with a bloody nose and Graham was standing over him, fists still clenched. "What in the hell is going on here?" Carter demanded. "He insulted my wife," Graham said flatly, breathing hard. "I will not tolerate disrespect toward Juliana, not from anyone." Carter looked at Billy, then at Graham. "Billy, you are fired. Get your things and get off my land." "I do not employ men who disrespect women, and I do not employ men stupid enough to insult another man's wife to his face." Billy protested, but Carter was immovable. As Billy stormed off to pack his belongings, Carter turned to Graham. "I appreciate a man who defends his woman, but I cannot have brawling among my hands. Next time, come to me first." "Understood, understood," Graham said. "But Mr. Carter, there will not be a next time, because every man here now knows that insulting my wife will get them knocked flat." Carter almost smiled. "Fair enough. Get back to work, all of you." Word of the fight spread, and after that the other ranch hands gave Graham wary respect. More importantly, they were polite to Juliana when they occasionally saw her in town or when she brought lunch out to Graham in the fields. Juliana had not been idle while Graham worked. She had transformed their little line shack into a real home, hanging curtains made from flour sacks, creating storage from scavenged wood, planting a small winter garden with hardy greens. She also began taking in sewing and mending work from some of the other ranch families, earning extra money that she saved carefully in a tin can hidden under their mattress. Spring came, and with it longer days and harder work. Graham was often gone from dawn to dusk, helping with the spring roundup and cattle branding. Juliana surprised everyone by joining the work when extra hands were needed. She could rope and ride nearly as well as any cowboy, and her tracking skills proved invaluable when locating strayed cattle in the rough terrain. Samuel Carter, impressed by her abilities, began paying her directly for her work during these busy periods. "You are one of the best trackers I have ever seen," he told her bluntly. "Man or woman, white or Apache, you have got a gift." The praise meant a lot to Juliana, Graham could tell. She had spent so much of her life being made to feel less than, for being mixed blood, for not fitting neatly into either world. Here at the Carter Ranch, she was valued for her skills and judged by her work. As spring turned to summer, Graham and Juliana settled into the rhythms of married life. They worked hard during the day and treasured their evenings together, cooking simple meals, talking about their dreams, making love in their small bed. They were saving money steadily, adding to the tin can under the mattress week by week. In June, Juliana realized she had not had her monthly courses in some time. She kept the knowledge to herself for another month, wanting to be certain before she told Graham. When she was sure, she waited for the perfect moment to share the news. It came on a Sunday evening in July. They had ridden out to a small creek on the edge of the Carter property, one of their favorite spots to escape the heat and the demands of the ranch. They sat on the bank, their feet dangling in the cool water, watching the sun set in shades of orange and pink. "Graham, I have something to tell you," Juliana said, her heart pounding. He looked at her, immediately attentive to the seriousness in her tone. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong. Something is right." She took a deep breath. "I am with child. We are going to have a baby." Graham stared at her for a long moment as if processing the words. Then a smile broke across his face, so wide and genuine that it made Juliana's heart soar. "A baby? Really? You are sure?" "I am sure. The baby should come in late winter, February or March, I think." Graham let out a whoop of joy and pulled her into his arms, laughing and squeezing her tight. Then he immediately released her. "I am sorry, did I hurt you? Is it safe to hold you? What do you need? Should you be sitting on the ground?" Juliana laughed at his sudden nervousness. "You can hold me. I am not fragile. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time while doing much harder work than sitting by a creek." But she could see the wonder and joy in his eyes, and it made her own happiness complete. They sat there until the stars came out, talking about names and making plans. Graham was determined that they would save even more aggressively now, that their child would never know the kind of poverty and instability he had known as an orphan. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through summer and into fall. Juliana continued working as long as she could, though she had to stop the harder ranch work as her belly grew. Graham was endlessly solicitous, worrying about her constantly, making sure she had enough to eat and did not overexert herself. In October, they had a visitor that changed their trajectory. A rider came through looking for Juliana, a young Apache man named Tarak who was a distant cousin. He had heard through the Apache network that she had married and settled near El Paso, and he brought news. "Your mother's brother, he is ill," Tarak told her. "Very ill. He has asked to see you to make peace before he passes." Juliana was torn. Her uncle had been one of those who had never fully accepted her mixed heritage, who had made her feel unwelcome among her mother's people. But he was still family, and she believed in honoring family bonds. Graham saw her conflict. "Go," he said. "I will come with you. You should not travel far in your condition, but if we are careful, we can make the journey." Tarak led them to the Apache encampment, about 50 miles to the northeast, in more remote territory. It was Graham's first real exposure to Apache life, and he was struck by the organization and culture he saw. The people were hospitable to him, though reserved, clearly uncertain about this white cowboy married to one of their own. Juliana's uncle, a wizened old man named Nate, was indeed very ill. But when he saw Juliana, his eyes lit up. They spoke in Apache, a language Graham did not understand, but he could read the emotion. There were tears and apologies and what looked like reconciliation. Afterward, Juliana explained. "He said he was wrong to make me feel unwelcome. That I was born of love between my mother and father, and that should be honored, not scorned. He said he sees now that the old ways are changing, that maybe people like me, who walk between worlds, are the future." They stayed 3 days with the Apache. Graham was fascinated by everything he saw, from the way they organized their camps to their methods of tracking and hunting. He was treated with cautious respect, especially after it became clear how much he loved Juliana and how protective he was of her. On the last night, they sat around a fire with Nate and some of the tribal elders. Through Juliana's translation, Nate spoke to Graham directly. I asked to see my niece so I could apologize before I walk the spirit path. But now I see another reason. You love her. With everything I am, Graham said simply. Good. She has had a hard path not fully accepted by either of her peoples. You give her acceptance, you give her home. Nate coughed, his illness evident. I want to give you both something. There is land, by the Pecos River that my niece told me you spoke of. That land is sacred to our people, but it is also being taken by settlers little by little. I would rather see it go to my niece and her husband, who will respect it, than to strangers who will not. Juliana gasped. Uncle, you do not have to. I do. Nate looked at Graham. It is not much, maybe 80 acres, but it has good water, good grass. You could build your ranch there. The tribal council has agreed. It is our gift to you both for your child who will carry Apache blood. Graham was overwhelmed. I do not know what to say. This is an incredible gift. Say you will honor the land. Say you will teach your children that Apache blood runs in their veins and they should be proud. I swear it, Graham said solemnly, on my honor and my life. They left the encampment with more than they had arrived with. They had legal claim to land, recognized by the Apache whose traditional territory it had been. It was not quite the same as a deed filed with the U.S. government, but it was a start, a moral claim that could be built upon. They returned to the Carter Ranch energized with new purpose. Graham worked harder than ever, taking on every extra task and hour he could. Juliana continued her sewing work, and they both scrimped and saved obsessively. They needed to buy lumber and supplies to build even a basic house on their land. They needed tools, seed, and eventually livestock. As winter approached and Juliana's pregnancy became quite advanced, they made the decision to stay at the line shack until after the baby came. It would be safer than trying to build and establish themselves on raw land while caring for a newborn. Juliana had found a midwife in El Paso, a Mexican woman named Senora Valdez, who was experienced and kind. As January turned to February, Juliana and Graham both became increasingly nervous about the impending birth. The baby decided to come on a cold night in late February. Graham had to ride through the dark to fetch Senora Valdez, terrified the whole time that he would return to find Juliana in trouble. But the midwife was calm and capable, and she took over the situation with reassuring authority. Graham was banished to the main room while Senora Valdez worked with Juliana in the bedroom. Hours passed, the longest of Graham's life. He could hear Juliana's cries of pain, and each one felt like a knife in his heart. He paced and prayed and made 1,000 bargains with God if only Juliana and the baby would be all right. Finally, in the darkest hour before dawn, he heard a new sound, a thin wail of infant lungs. His heart nearly stopped. Then, Senora Valdez opened the bedroom door, smiling. "Come meet your son, Senor Morrison." Graham stumbled into the bedroom. Juliana was propped up against pillows, looking exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in cloth. Graham approached slowly, almost afraid to look. Then Juliana pulled back the cloth, and Graham saw his son for the first time. The baby was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air. His skin was a beautiful shade that spoke of both his parents, and his eyes, when they fluttered open, were dark and alert. "He is perfect," Graham whispered, tears streaming down his face. "You are perfect, both of you." Juliana was crying too. "Do you want to hold him?" With shaking hands, Graham took his son into his arms. The baby was so light, so fragile, and yet Graham could already see strength there. "Hello, little one. I am your papa. I have been waiting to meet you." The baby made a small sound, and Graham laughed through his tears. He looked at Juliana. "We never decided on a name." I want to name him after my father, Juliana said. He was a good man who loved my mother and me despite what others thought. I would like our son to carry his name. John Morrison. John, Graham repeated, testing it out. He looked down at his son. John Morrison. It is a strong name. Welcome to the world, Johnny. The next weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and endless wonder. Graham continued working, but every spare moment was spent with Juliana and Johnny. He had never known he could love someone as much as he loved this tiny person who depended on them completely. As spring arrived and Johnny grew stronger, Graham and Juliana began making concrete plans to move to their land. Samuel Carter was sorry to lose them, but understood their desire to build their own place. He offered Graham occasional work if they needed extra money, and told them they would always be welcome at his ranch. In April, with Johnny now 2 months old and strong, they loaded their few possessions onto a wagon Graham had managed to buy and set out for their land. The journey took 2 days, and they approached the valley that Nate had described with excitement and nervousness. It was as beautiful as they remembered. The Pecos River ran clear and cool along one edge of their property. The valley was sheltered by low hills, with good grass and scattered trees. Graham could already see where he would build their house, near a natural spring but elevated enough to avoid flooding. They lived in a tent that first month while Graham worked on building a small cabin. It was rough work, but neighbors from the few scattered ranches in the area came to help, drawn by frontier tradition that said you helped new settlers get established. Some were uncomfortable with Juliana's heritage, but they could not deny that both Morrisons were hard workers. The cabin was simple, just 2 rooms like the line shack had been, but it was theirs, built on their own land. They moved in during a warm day in May, carrying Johnny across the threshold together. "This is your home, little one," Juliana whispered to the baby. "Your papa and I built this for you, on land given to us with love and hope for the future." That summer was hard work but filled with joy. Graham started building their herd, buying a few horses from Samuel Carter at a fair price. Juliana planted a large garden, and they began establishing the infrastructure they would need for a working ranch. Johnny grew into a happy, healthy baby who seemed to love the outdoor life. Juliana would often work with him strapped to her back in the Apache style, and he would watch everything with alert, curious eyes. By the time Johnny was a year old, the ranch was really starting to take shape. They had a small stable, a chicken coop, and a growing garden. Their horse herd had increased to 6 animals, and Graham was developing a reputation in the area for his skill at training working horses. Money was still tight, and they worked harder than Graham had ever worked in his life, but it was work towards something that was theirs. Each fence post driven, each horse trained, each crop harvested, was building toward the dream they had talked about that night in the cave. As Johnny began to walk and talk, Graham and Juliana discussed having another child. "Johnny needs a sibling," Juliana said. "I do not want him to grow up alone." "Are you sure you are ready?" Graham asked, remembering how difficult Johnny's birth had been. "I am sure. I want our home filled with children and laughter." Their second child, a daughter they named Julia Rose, was born in the spring when Johnny was 2 years old. Her birth was easier than her brother's, and from the first moment Graham held her, he was completely smitten. She had Juliana's delicate features but his lighter brown hair, and her eyes were a striking hazel that seemed to shift between green and brown depending on the light. Johnny was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything from diaper changes to feeding time. Graham would often find him sitting next to her cradle, talking to her in his toddler babble, telling her stories about the ranch and the horses. The years passed in a pattern of hard work and deep satisfaction. The ranch grew slowly but steadily. By the time Johnny was 5 and Julia was 3, they had 15 horses, 24 chickens, a milk cow, and had added a third room to their cabin. They had also become established members of their small community. There were still some who looked down on them for their mixed marriage, but most people judged them by their character and work ethic. Graham had helped numerous neighbors with horse problems, and Juliana had assisted at several births and illnesses with her knowledge of healing herbs and practical nursing. Johnny and Julia were growing up wild and free, learning to ride almost before they could walk, helping with ranch chores appropriate to their ages. Graham made sure they knew how to read and write, using his precious books to teach them every evening by lamplight. Juliana taught them Apache traditions and stories, wanting them to understand that part of their heritage. When Johnny was 7, he asked the question that Graham had been dreading. "Papa, why did Tommy Wilson call me a half-breed? What does that mean?" Graham set down the harness he had been mending and pulled his son onto his lap. Juliana came over too, and they faced this difficult conversation together. "It means that your mama's mother was Apache, and your mama's father was white like me," Graham explained carefully. "Some people think that is a bad thing, that people from different backgrounds should not marry and have children. But why?" Johnny's young face was confused. "Because people fear what is different from them," Juliana said gently. "And sometimes fear makes people cruel." "Are you sad that you are my mama and papa?" Johnny asked. "Never," Graham said fiercely. "You and your sister are the best things that ever happened to us. We are proud of you both, and you should be proud of who you are. You come from 2 strong peoples, Johnny. That makes you stronger, not weaker." Julia, who had been listening from her corner where she was playing with a rag doll, piped up. "I like being Apache. Mama taught me the song about the mountain spirits." Graham smiled at his daughter. "And I like that you know that song. Your Apache heritage is something special, something to value. Do not ever let anyone make you feel ashamed of who you are." It was a conversation they would have to repeat in various forms over the years, as their children encountered prejudice and ignorance. But Graham and Juliana remained united in their determination to raise their children with pride in both sides of their heritage. When Johnny was 10 and Julia was 8, a third child joined the family. They had not planned for another pregnancy, but when Thomas Graham Morrison was born, they welcomed him with joy. He was the biggest of their babies, with strong lungs and an appetite to match. Johnny and Julia adored their baby brother, and Thomas grew up surrounded by love and attention. The ranch continued to thrive. By 1895, 17 years after that fateful blizzard, the Morrison Ranch was known throughout the region for quality horses. Graham had developed a particular expertise in breeding and training working horses that were smart, steady, and reliable. Ranchers came from as far away as San Antonio and Santa Fe to buy Morrison horses. They had built a proper house by then, still modest but comfortable, with 4 bedrooms, a real kitchen, and a parlor with a stone fireplace. The old cabin had been converted into a bunkhouse for the 2 hired hands they now employed during busy seasons. Juliana had become a respected figure in their community as well. She was known as a healer, and people came from miles around seeking her help with difficult births, illnesses, and injuries. She never charged much, often accepting payment in trade, but she had earned genuine respect for her skills and knowledge. Graham watched his wife with wonder as she moved through their life. She was 37 now, with a few threads of silver in her dark hair, but to him, she was as beautiful as the day he had found her in the snow. She was strong and capable, a full partner in every aspect of their life. They had built something real and lasting together. One evening in late fall, after the children were in bed, Graham and Juliana sat on their porch watching the sunset. It was something they tried to do as often as possible, stealing a few quiet moments together in their busy life. "Do you remember the cave?" Juliana asked suddenly. Graham smiled. "Of course. How could I forget? That was where our life together began. Sometimes it feels like a dream, like maybe I did die in the snow and all of this is just a beautiful dream my spirit is having." Graham reached over and took her hand. "It is real. You are real, I am real, and everything we have built together is real." Juliana squeezed his hand. "I never told you properly, you know. Back then, when I asked you to marry me, I said it was about debt and survival. But that was not the whole truth." "What was the truth?" Graham asked softly. "The truth was that even in that cave, even when I thought we might die, I knew you were someone special. The way you took care of me, the way you talked to me to keep me awake, the dreams you shared. I fell in love with you there in the worst moment of my life. When I asked you to marry me, it was because I could not imagine facing the future without you." Graham felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Why did you never tell me this before?" "I do not know. Pride, maybe. Fear that you had only accepted out of pity or loneliness. But we have been married 17 years now, and I do not want there to be any secrets between us. I love you, Graham Morrison. I have loved you since the beginning." Graham pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "I loved you then, too. I think I knew it when you offered yourself as my wife, so brave and bold even though you were still recovering from nearly freezing to death. You were the most courageous person I had ever met. You still are." They kissed, long and deep, with all the passion and tenderness of nearly 2 decades of partnership. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "We have had a good life," Juliana said. "We have had a wonderful life," Graham corrected. "And it is not over yet. We still have years ahead of us, watching our children grow, maybe grandchildren someday, continuing to build this ranch." "I like the sound of that," Juliana said, settling into his embrace as the last light faded from the sky. The years continued to unfold in a pattern of seasons and growth. Johnny grew into a strong young man who shared his father's gift with horses. At 18, he was already an expert trainer and had begun to take over more of the day-to-day running of the ranch. He was respectful and hardworking, and Graham was immensely proud of the man his son had become. Julia was 16 and had inherited both her mother's healing gift and her father's practical intelligence. She helped Juliana with the healing work and also kept the ranch books, having a natural head for numbers. She was beautiful and spirited, and Graham knew he would soon have young men coming around courting, though he was not quite ready for that thought. Thomas was 6 and full of mischief and energy. He was fearless on horseback and showed signs of being even more naturally talented than his older brother. He was also the one who could always make the whole family laugh with his antics and observations. In 1897, when Johnny was 19, he announced that he wanted to marry. The girl was Sarah Mitchell, daughter of their nearest neighbors. She was a sweet, hard-working girl, and both Graham and Juliana approved. The wedding was held at the Morrison Ranch, with neighbors coming from miles around. Graham watched his son exchange vows with his bride, and he could not help but remember his own wedding in that small church so many years ago. He felt Juliana's hand slip into his and knew she was thinking the same thing. "Another generation begins," she whispered. "Another generation of Morrisons," Graham agreed. "All because you asked me to marry you during a blizzard." Juliana smiled up at him. "Best decision I ever made." "Second best," Graham corrected. The best decision was not giving up in that cave, fighting to survive so we could have all of this. Johnny and Sarah moved into the old cabin, now fully renovated, and began their life together while continuing to work on the ranch. A year later, Juliana and Graham became grandparents when Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby girl they named Grace. Holding his granddaughter for the first time, Graham felt the profound weight of legacy. This tiny child was the future, carrying the bloodline and history of all who had come before. She would grow up on this ranch that he and Juliana had built from nothing, would learn the values they had worked so hard to instill in their children. "What are you thinking?" Juliana asked, watching him cradle Grace with such tenderness. "I am thinking about how that blizzard that almost killed us both was actually the best thing that ever happened to me. If not for that storm, I never would have found you. Johnny and Julia and Thomas would not exist. Grace would not exist. This ranch, this life, none of it would be real." Juliana moved closer, looking down at her granddaughter. "The Apache believe that everything happens for a reason, that the spirits guide us to where we need to be. Maybe that storm was meant to bring us together." "I believe it," Graham said simply. As they stood there together, 3 generations of Morrisons in that small room, Graham thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. From that desperate night in a cave to this ranch full of life and love, it had been an incredible journey. Julia married at 18, choosing a young rancher from a neighboring territory who had been courting her patiently for 2 years. Thomas was growing up fast, already talking about the horses he would breed when he was old enough to take over part of the ranch operation. In 1902, when Graham was 50 and Juliana was 44, they found themselves with a house that was suddenly quieter. All 3 of their children were launched into their own lives, though Johnny and his growing family still lived and worked on the ranch. Julia visited often with her husband and their baby son. Thomas was away learning more advanced horse training techniques from a renowned horseman in California, though he wrote home weekly. One evening, Graham and Juliana sat on their porch as they had so many times before. They were older now, with silver in their hair and lines on their faces, but their love was as strong as ever. "You know what today is?" Graham asked. Juliana thought for a moment, then smiled. 24 years since you found me in the snow." 24 years since the best day of my life," Graham corrected. "The day I met you." "You saved my life that day," Juliana said softly. "No," Graham shook his head. "You saved mine. I was drifting before I met you, no roots, no purpose beyond the next job. You gave me a reason to build something lasting. You gave me a home, a family, a future." Juliana leaned her head on his shoulder. "We saved each other then. We have been saving each other ever since." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over their land. In the distance, they could see Johnny working with a young horse in the corral, could hear the laughter of their grandchildren playing near the barn. The ranch was thriving, the family was healthy, and life was good. "If you could go back," Graham asked, "back to that cave on that terrible night, knowing everything that would happen, would you still have asked me to marry you?" Juliana did not hesitate. "Every time. In every life, I would choose you every time." Graham kissed her forehead. "And I would accept every time. You are my wife, my partner, my best friend, the love of my life. These 24 years with you have been the greatest adventure I could ever imagine." "Here is to 24 more," Juliana said, lifting an imaginary glass. "And 24 after that," Graham added with a smile. They both knew that was unlikely at their ages, but it did not matter. What mattered was that they had found each other against all odds, had built a life together that honored both their heritages, had raised children who were strong and proud of who they were. The Morrison Ranch continued to grow and prosper. Johnny took over more responsibility as Graham aged, but Graham never fully retired. He was still working with horses in his 60s, still vital and active, though he moved a bit slower than he once had. Juliana continued her healing work until her hands grew too stiff with arthritis to do the delicate work. Even then, she advised and taught younger women who wanted to learn healing arts, passing on knowledge that combined Apache traditional medicine with techniques she had learned from various doctors and midwives over the years. Their grandchildren multiplied, Grace and her siblings from Johnny and Sarah, Julia's 3 children, and eventually Thomas's children when he married, and settled on a parcel of the Morrison ranch that Graham and Juliana deeded to him. In 1910, when Graham was 58 and Juliana was 52, they celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a huge gathering at the ranch. Friends and family came from across the territory, filling their home and yard with laughter and love. Johnny stood to make a toast. 30 years ago, my parents got married after knowing each other for only a few days. Everyone thought they were crazy. A drifting cowboy and an Apache woman, building a life together in a time and place that did not always welcome their union. But they proved everyone wrong. They built this ranch from nothing, raised us 3 kids to be proud of who we are, and showed us what real love and partnership looks like. To Graham and Juliana Morrison, the best parents and best example anyone could ask for. There was not a dry eye in the house as Graham and Juliana stood, holding hands, accepting the love and well wishes of their family and community. They had truly made a place for themselves, earned respect through hard work and integrity. That night, after everyone had left and they were alone in their bedroom, Graham held Juliana close. 30 years. It went by so fast. And so slow, Juliana said with a smile. Remember those early years when we were working so hard we barely had time to sleep? Those felt long. But worth it, Graham said. Every moment was worth it to get to here, to have what we have now. I would not change a single thing, Juliana agreed. Well, maybe I would have asked you to marry me sooner in that cave. She laughed. Graham chuckled. You were half frozen. You asked me as soon as you were physically capable of speaking properly. They lay in comfortable silence for a while. Then Juliana said, Graham, I want to tell you something. The serious note in her voice made him prop himself up on one elbow to look at her. What is it? I've been having pains in my chest. Senora Valdez looked at me a few months ago. She said my heart is not strong. Fear clutched at Graham. What? Why did you not tell me before? Because there is nothing to be done about it, and I did not want you to worry unnecessarily. But I want to be honest with you, I do not know how much more time I have. Maybe years, maybe less. No, Graham said fiercely. You are going to be fine. We are going to have many more years together. Juliana touched his face gently. Maybe we will, I hope we do. But if we do not, I want you to know that I have no regrets. I have lived a life beyond my wildest dreams. I have been loved completely by a good man. I have children and grandchildren who make me proud every day. I have a home and a legacy. Whatever time we have left, whether it is years or months or days, I am grateful for all of it. Graham felt tears running down his face. I am not ready to lose you. And I am not planning on leaving you anytime soon, Juliana assured him. But we do not always get to choose these things. So let us make the most of whatever time we have. Let us not waste a single moment on regrets or fears. Graham held her tighter. I love you so much, Juliana. You are my whole world. And you are mine, she whispered back. Juliana lived for 6 more years, long enough to see Johnny's oldest daughter Grace get married, long enough to welcome her 10th grandchild, long enough to see the ranch expand to over 300 acres. She remained active and engaged until the very end, though Graham could see her gradually slowing, her energy fading. She passed away peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1916, with Graham holding her hand. She was 58 years old, and she had lived a full, rich life. The funeral was the largest the region had ever seen. People came from across Texas and New Mexico, a testament to the respect and affection the Morrisons had earned. She was buried on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a large cottonwood tree she had always loved. Graham stood at her grave long after everyone else had left, talking to her as if she could still hear him. "I do not know how to do this without you. You have been my partner for 38 years. How do I go on alone?" But even as he asked the question, he knew the answer. He went on because they had built something bigger than just themselves. The ranch, the family, the legacy, all of it demanded that he continue. Juliana would want him to keep going, to see their grandchildren grow, to ensure that everything they had worked for continued to thrive. Graham threw himself into work, finding solace in the familiar rhythms of ranch life. His children and grandchildren surrounded him with love and support. Johnny took over running most of the day-to-day operations, allowing Graham to focus on what he loved most, working with the horses. The years after Juliana's death were bittersweet. Graham missed her with an ache that never fully went away, but he found joy in watching his family grow and flourish. He taught his grandchildren to ride and rope, passed on the horse training techniques he had spent a lifetime perfecting, and told stories about their grandmother so they would never forget her. In 1920, when Graham was 68, he finally felt his own strength beginning to fail. He had lived a hard life, and his body was wearing out. But he did not fear death. He knew what waited for him on the other side. On a warm summer evening, surrounded by his children and many of his grandchildren, Graham Morrison passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was buried next to Juliana under the cottonwood tree, and his headstone reads simply, "Graham Morrison, 1852-1920, beloved husband, father, and grandfather." The Morrison Ranch continued to operate for generations, passed down through Johnny and his children, then to their children. The story of how it all began, of a cowboy who found an Apache woman dying in a blizzard and chose to save her, of a woman brave enough to ask a stranger to marry her, of a love that built something lasting despite all odds. That story was told and retold, becoming part of family legend. The original house still stood, carefully maintained by each generation. The cottonwood tree where Graham and Juliana were buried became a place of pilgrimage for family members, a reminder of where they came from and the love that started it all. In the end, what Graham and Juliana Morrison left behind was more than just land and horses. They left a legacy of courage, of love across cultural divides, of building something from nothing through hard work and partnership. They proved that two people from very different worlds could come together and create something beautiful, that love could overcome prejudice and hardship, that faith and determination could transform desperate beginnings into a lasting heritage. Their great-great-grandchildren would eventually number in the dozens, spreading across the country, carrying Morrison blood and the story of that fateful blizzard in 1878. Some would look more Apache, some more European, but all of them carried the pride that Graham and Juliana had worked so hard to instill, the knowledge that they came from two strong peoples, and that their mixed heritage was something to celebrate, not hide. The love story that began in a cave during a deadly storm, that started with a desperate proposal and a brave acceptance, rippled forward through time, touching lives that Graham and Juliana could never have imagined. It was a testament to the power of love, the strength of partnership, and the enduring legacy that two people can create when they commit to building something together. In the end, it was a simple story. A cowboy sheltered an Apache girl from the blizzard. She said she would be his wife. He said he accepted. But from that simple beginning grew something profound and lasting, a love that transcended cultural boundaries, a family that spanned generations, and a legacy that would endure long after both of them had returned to the earth. It was exactly the kind of life they had dreamed about in that cave so many years ago, when the future was uncertain and survival was far from guaranteed. They had taken a chance on each other in the worst possible circumstances, and that chance had blossomed into something neither could have fully imagined. That was the real magic of their story, not that it began in such desperate circumstances, but that they took those circumstances and built from them something beautiful, lasting, and true. They proved that love, real love, was not about perfect circumstances or ideal timing. It was about two people committing to each other and working together to build the life they both wanted. Graham and Juliana Morrison's story became a touchstone for their descendants, a reminder that courage and love could overcome any obstacle, that heritage was something to be proud of regardless of what others thought, and that family was the most important legacy anyone could leave behind. The Morrison Ranch still operates today, a working ranch that has adapted to modern times but still honors its roots. And on special occasions, family members still gather at that cottonwood tree, telling the story of how it all began with a blizzard, a cowboy, an Apache girl, a proposal, and an acceptance that changed everything.